All right. Oh, we've lost everyone. Suddenly, Skype has had a nightmare. Si, you've disappeared. I'm going to add you back
Me?
in. Hewitt, yeah, you've disappeared. Oh, no, that's
Okay.
me. We're having a nightmare. We've started this podcast off in the worst possible way.
Lost everyone.
Oh,
Now I've got an echo. We've all got echoes now.
yeah. Is that you, Luce?
Sorry.
We are live. We're just having a bit of a technical nightmare. We're going to start.
Oh, I think that's not helpful.
All
Hello?
right.
Am I still there?
All right. Sorry about this, everyone. We're having a bit of a nightmare. We're having technical issues. Hewitt, I don't know what's going on here.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Just a sec. The program has had a nightmare. There we go. We are good. Okay. Welcome to, sorry about this. Welcome to the Break Magazine End of Dakar wrap-up show podcast. The race ended this morning. I don't quite know what's happened. I'm very confused. I'm a little bit emotional. It's been absolutely fantastic, but in like the most stressful possible way. I'm sure you two feel the same, but it's almost been a little bit of a voyeuristic ride where I want to see what's going on all the time, but I'm permanently terrified that someone's going to have another massive crash, and it stresses me out, and I don't know how to deal with it. Every day I look at my phone, I'm like, somebody's, what's going on? And normally at this point in the podcast, I tell everyone what beer I'm drinking. I like drinking beer, but I didn't bring one today. So this time, I'm going to tell you about all the great things that you can buy off Break Magazine. This podcast is brought to you by Break Magazine branded clothing. We make some great products, and you should check them out on our website. Now that we've done that bit, that's the advert bit done. We're not big enough to have a real advert. So we're going to talk about Dakar. And I'm going to start this off with, I think, the primary question. If you haven't seen it yet, the person that won Dakar was not someone that any of us picked. We said he was fast. We also said he had a big crash last year and had a bit of a moment. Didn't know if he wanted to ride rally bikes anymore. And now we're sat here, and Kevin Benavidez won Dakar, and he won it fair and square, and I'm not really sure how. I'm not really sure what happened there. So if anyone has any ideas about what happened there, please feel free to allude and provide some insight. If anyone in the comments has any idea what happened there, also please let us know. But I think one of you two can maybe take us back and explain.
Well, Kevin, he's kind of just been there or thereabouts for the whole race. He was in the top 5 going into the rest day, and he's kind of just hovered around there ever since. And yeah, with Nacho and Toby, and then Beretta, we'll come on to that later. But with those guys just imploding everywhere, he was kind of just the next guy along, and he was just in that position to pounce when it mattered a couple of days ago.
And I think the big part of what you just said as well is that he absolutely took advantage of the situation that he'd ridden himself into, and none more so than today when he started the stage in 3rd place. Not the greatest position to start in on any stage from this year's Dakar. He rode the wheels off it. He caught Sam, he passed Sam, he led through the dunes, he led all the way to the finish, and he barely lost any time. And it was the ride of a man that, well, he deserves to win the toughest race. Each year in Dakar, it seems like the person that comes out with that win is the person that turned up in the exact moment that they needed to turn up, and he was that guy this year.
So maybe we should pay attention to some of the things we used to say before it all got turned on its head in the last couple of years. And we used to always say, no one can win a Dakar without sort of 5 or 6 goes. And obviously there's been a couple of exceptions to that in recent times, but historically that's always been the case. So I've just been looking at Benavidez's record. This is his 5th Dakar, and he hasn't DNF'd according to the according to the spec sheet.
Indeed.
Wow.
So, yeah, there you go. Maybe there's something in that, eh?
Indeed. So,
He's won
alongside that,
4 stages, totally.
in his whole
his
Dakar career. But one of
Yeah.
those as well, this was, I remember, when he first burst onto the scene a few years ago. We didn't really know who he was. Turns out he's a really good enduro rider. And he won a stage maybe from the front. He won one and then he won another. I've got some memory of that, of like him being incredible at leading out in South America and making everyone look a little bit silly in one of his early years. And there was all the hype around him. When he first started going well, I'm sure I was the same. I was like, wow, this guy's amazing. Who is he? Why is he so fast? And then down a little bit and then boom, smashed it. Made us all look like mugs. None of us saw it coming. I'm sure, I don't know about you, but I was sat there on the rest day and I was like, man, there's so many people that can win. You know, we've got all these Honda guys that are great, but Benavidez isn't one of them. Dude's nowhere. So, yeah, that was that. I think my next talking point, I haven't got any notes. I've got stuff in my head. And it's absolutely my favorite part of this year's rally so far. And maybe in a little bit of a sad way, but yesterday was the bizarrest thing I have ever seen anyone on Dakar do. But if you didn't see this,
last mistake he made,
because it's the last weird mistake he made. And it's a little bit of a running joke now with Joan Barreda. We talked about it at the start of the race. We're like, this guy's really good, but there's no way he's going to win. Sai picked him 3 years in a row to be the winner. And he just keeps doing weird things. But he rode straight past a fuel stop. All fuel stops in Dakar are compulsory. He rode past it, looked back, kept riding, ran out of fuel, called the helicopter because he had a concussion. And we all do weird things when we have concussions. There's no denying that. I'm sure I am the same. I have many memories of becoming slightly incapable of doing basic things. I know many other, but there's many bigger questions around this. A few people I've seen have asked about safety issues and so on. What the hell was going on? There's been some conspiracy theories. I think it's worth one of you to explaining what the theoretical conspiracy theories might be around this subject. But also, can someone explain it to me?
I mean, it was a crazy morning on our little internal WhatsApp group, wasn't it? Because as you say, it's the most bizarre thing that I can ever remember anybody doing. I mean, there's a lot of bizarre things happen in Dakar, but for someone at that level to not fill their petrol tank up.
But also, it's not like it's day one. It's not like the first fuel stop of the rally, and he's like, "Oh, that fuel thing's important, isn't it?" We're 11 days in. No, we're 11 Dakars, so he's probably got 80 Dakar stages under his belt because he likes to crash out every now and then, and he's got 20 odd stage wins. 26 stage wins now. So even there, he's probably at a 1/3 ratio of stage wins to stage rides, which is mental. The dude
is mental.
And then there was also this sort of crazy thing, which none of us seem to know what went on about, Breivik saying on the podium that KTM were messing with him. So then I started to try and work out what that could be. And the only, this is totally wild speculation. I came up with this idea that maybe Honda decided to send Barreda out to deliberately miss the fuel, to lay a mark in the sand for the others to follow, so they didn't have to. They could confirmation navigate rather than opening navigate, and thereby not lose as much time on the stage. And then their plan was to stash some fuel for Barreda in the neutralization, but he didn't quite make it.
Which is a wild theory.
But maybe because he forgot the plan was to go like a bit steadier to make his fuel last to the neutralization. But he clearly just went wide open and ran out. Those bikes, when you prep for Dakar, the goal is your bike should be able to do 250 Ks. That's the refuel distance. And the organisers always say, allow 10% margin. So he's done that. He's run out at 67 kilometres, bang on.
267, yeah.
He just only got half the memo.
Well, at least for Honda, they know that their fuel distance is good. Do you know? At least they know their fuel distance is good in future. Maybe not in the sand. They need to work on that. But at the moment, they know that. However, as much as that is wild speculation, I was listening to Mr. Jesse Ziegler of Cycle News. Him and Quinn Cody do a good podcast. We listened to an episode earlier while we were building our bikes, and they also touched on this subject, which was highly amusing. They also have a very similar view of Bereda to us, that he does impressive things followed by mental things. And there was a similar theory from them that maybe they were trying to use Bereda as a distraction, which again is a little bit out there. But I think where the conversation about the Honda team comes in to a more realistic prospect is that they, as much as they vehemently defended themselves, and Ricky Brabeck on the finish line of the stage was telling everyone how he was going to take it to KTM, and, you know, if they want to play that game, we'll play this game as well. Honda have got some history. Benavidez has some history.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of rumors around Bereda twisting the rules, but also there is the history, and this is, I think, for us in Europe, we don't know huge amounts about this because the Baja racing series in the States is not something we get a lot of information about. But anyone that's watched the A-class documentary Dust to Glory, which you should watch, it is one of the best motorbike documentaries I've ever seen.
Absolutely.
If you can still buy it. There is a scene in that where they talk about the bending of the rules of Ricky's own people who are now in his camp, Johnny Campbell, as he twists the rules of the route to try and gain an advantage, to find a way into the lead of a race. And then ever since he has joined that team, there has been this little situation where Honda have bent some rules. And 2 years ago, the last Dakar in South America, they got in some trouble for it. They fueled outside of a race stage in a neutralization stage, which is what your kind of theoretical theory is. But also, after being told not to do it, they taped some notes on how to cheat the course onto Benavidez's tank and got caught for it. And they were like, well, we didn't do that. That didn't happen. But obviously it did. And now Matt Men are banned and we have roadblocks in the morning. So obviously that happened. So like their vehement defense of it is one of those situations that maybe makes them look a bit more guilty. I think the other side of this is a little bit sadder because obviously there's an 85% chance that they weren't trying to do something shady because it's a really weird way to do it if you're going to. Like there's better ways to cheat for sure. And I don't think any of us really believe that that's what happened. It's nice to speculate and it's funny. But the safety issue also is a thing. You know, concussions have become a problem in the last few years, right? So, yeah, I think it's worth discussing the whole topic of safety because it's such a big thing after what happened last year that the organizers were trying to change it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
There was a bit of tumbleweed there, guys. Come on.
Well, can of worms fully opened.
So let's start. I think the first big safety point, we talked about it before. Let's go with airbags.
Airbags, yeah. I've only heard like brief interviews with people who said they have had crashes and had them go off, and I think I said before, it's mostly been just comical stories of them getting up and not being able to get back on the bike because they've been like the Michelin man kind of thing, and eventually it goes down, you have to change the cartridge and then you set off again. So, but yeah, I'll interesting to see what like Toby says, for example, about his crash, and Nacho says about his crash.
I don't think Toby knows anything about what happened after his crash. He was not with it.
Wow, that's fair enough. Yeah.
So that yeah. So go on. Sorry.
No, it's just that was it. Like really, yeah.
So yeah, I think that the airbag thing, like it obviously we weren't out there, and none of us have ridden with them yet. So I'm the same as you. It'll be really interesting to hear what people that have ridden with them have to say. But I think, for me, they're still like quite embryonic and a little bit controversial. They've worked very well in MotoGP, but it is quite a different environment. And over the years, we've seen many things with rider safety, and I'm all for it. There's no question. And hopefully it goes in a good direction. But it does feel a little bit like, to me, like with the early stages of neck braces when they didn't make them compulsory on Dakar like they have this time, but they were kind of really highly recommended. And we went through this phase of, is it a good thing or not? And, since I've been racing, that's happened many times. Like I can even remember back when full face helmets came out and we had the same arguments, whether they were safe or not, and whether they were, going to hurt people more or not. And, they were banned in youth motocross for a long time when everyone was wearing full faces because of the risk to neck injuries and stuff like that. So these things do take time to, for them to become established and for it to be certain that it is the right direction. But you have to go through that process. And the only thing I'm questioning about the airbag thing is that the reason we've seen so many concussions this year? Is it causing a harder hit to the head because they're turning into this different shaped thing that's not tucking and rolling? Because there seems to me there's been an inordinate number of like quite bad concussions this year. There's then still the whole discussion we had earlier is how do you actually control that and measure that? Because as soon as you start telling Dakar riders, like they do in other sports, that if you hit your head, you're out, then everybody just stops telling you stop telling the story that you hit your head. I would, I'm going to go to the start line the next day and just not tell anyone I've hit my head. That's the double-edged sword for me, but that's the one thing it seems that there has been some pretty bad, pretty much every rider I've seen that's crashed out has also said they've got a concussion.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, at least in the lead group. The one thing I will give Dakar some credit for on that, however, is as much as Bereda was able to start the stage and ride a day and a half with a concussion, unless they, like you say, introduce that check at the start line, they're generally very good at pulling riders out the moment that happens. We've seen them do it in the past with both privateers and people like Nacho just the last few days. I think they kind of, as much as there's a little bit of question mark over some of their decisions, the medical team, when it comes to that, I think they're fantastic and they're really respectful of the issue of concussion, right? Like the moment Nacho wasn't okay, they weren't like, go on then, son, you'll be all right, just tough it out. They were like, no, you're going to hospital, dude. And they kept him in, he didn't stay there for an hour. He stayed there for a day. So I think they need some credit for that. Like you say, I'm impressed you remember that far back. That was a long time ago, the old open face helmet thing, by the way.
But that's because I've kept every helmet I've ever had so that I've got that I can remember all the concussions, because all the helmets have got big graunches in them.
So I suppose the biggest other safety issue, the one that's really stood out because none of us are quite sure what it's about, is the tire thing. And it mostly stood out with Toby's tire. So, can you break that down a little bit? What happened? Whether it matters? How did it not explode? Where did he get the zip ties from?
Well, Toby's one was a little bit different because it was on the marathon stage. So, on the marathon stage, you just can't change wheels, can't change tires anyway. So it's a bit of a different rule. Whereas if it wasn't the marathon stage, he could have changed it that night to something else and just use another one of his 5 tires. So
that's not a new rule. That's like a rule that's been around for a while. The marathon can't change your tires rule.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
So my understanding as well is everyone that had a problem with split tires, they were in those same 2 stages, right? Like it's a terrain-based problem, because also De Sautre went out after that had happened, but maybe it seems like his crash wasn't because of his tire.
I don't think so. No, De Sautre's crash was a misunderstanding of the road book and just a a nasty piece of terrain, really, I think.
What you're trying to say is it was a classic de Sautrey crash. Okay, well, our form book might have been off, but we were definitely right about two things. De Sautrey still had a massive crash, and Bereda still did something that none of us understand.
Or expect. I mean, you've got to give him credit for that. At least he hit.
Yeah, he's the only person I've ever known to snap a set of handlebars for no reason and forget to go to a fuel stop, a compulsory fuel stop where you need your fuel. Wow. Anyway, so the tire thing, the other side of that is tires were bought, the tire rule, the 6 tire rule for elite riders was brought in as a safety element. At the start of this, when we talked about this subject, I think all of us were in agreement that don't really understand how it makes it safer having less grip, especially on a rear tire. Is that better? What do you think? You've just watched 12 days of people racing. Has it made a significant difference? Has it made it safer? Has it made it less safe?
Yeah, I mean, I don't ride at that level, so it's difficult to say. But Queen Cody and Ziegler made the point in the other podcast that we've listened to, that they've got as many front tires as they want, so they're riding along in this terrain, and they've always got good grip on the front because they're running a new tire every day. So, but it's the back that's the issue. So it's I'm guessing it makes like a quite an unbalanced feeling on the bike when you're running a front end that feels awesome, and then a rear end that's on its last legs kind of thing. You're just trying to eke it out. So yeah, it's a strange rule, and yeah, we kind of think collectively don't really see the benefit, but yeah, the logic that they put into it is that give riders 6 tires and they'll try and make them last for the 12 days, but they won't try to make them last until they're, not quite optimum anymore. They'll try and make them last until there's literally nothing left on the tire. And when you're trying to ride those speeds, when the tire's got that little grip, then it's, people are going to crash. That's just how it is.
How very observational of you.
Yeah, I think the point for me with all that, and I'm sure we'll come on to the road book in a bit, but you know what ASO have quite clearly tried to do is to come up with a bunch of rules that bring a little bit of the whole adventure / management of the race back into it for the front guys. So, we talked about it right on the very first one, is that you have, back in the day, you had to kind of look after the bike and you had to manage so many things about your race. All the stuff, sleeping in a tent, water rationing, fuel distances. There was a lot of stuff to manage in the race, and a lot of those things have gone away now because bikes, generally speaking, are super reliable. Tires are super reliable, all that stuff. So they've tried to look at ways to make the top riders have to manage their race. But the problem they're coming up against, I think Sam Sunderland said it fantastically a couple of days from the end, or maybe it was on the marathon stage, where someone asked him about that whole managing the race, and he was like, there's just so many of us that can go so fast now. If you manage the race, you're an hour off the pace. And so, despite what the organisers are doing to come up with these ideas, the guys are just going out and going wide open off the front of the race.
Yeah, they quite clearly
are.
So
unless you make people, I don't know, right? I don't know how you solve that. I haven't got an answer, but I think that's the inherent problem, is that there's a lot of guys that can go fast and the kit can support it. They can hit things wide open all day, every day.
So here's an interesting question. As this was an elite rider only rule, when you've been to Dakar, both of you in the past, how many days were you realistically getting out of a rear tire before you had to change it, before you were like, I'm not risking this anymore, I'm going to put a new one on?
Well,
depends how many you could afford to take.
2 tires, Si. You've got 2.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, we're all kind of riding at different levels and stuff, but like for sure, I could make a rear tire last at least 3 days, for sure, easy, if I had to. I'd like to probably change it every 2, but yeah, for sure, at least 3 days.
That was from Mike Caton, that question. It was a good question.
Yeah, it is. And for me, the limit was always more mooses. Like it's super. I think Si said it on the first podcast. It super depends on the terrain. Like if you dunes all day, then your tire's new at the end of the day. But the moose is always more the risk for me. But yeah, generally, I mean, we did last time we went. We were like, every 2 days, weren't we? So we were sort of changing a front tire one day and a rear the next.
And so what about back in, where in 1998, your first Dakar? What was the tire situation then? Obviously, it's come a long way now since then. Mooses. Oh, and Louise Mitchell asks, the 3 days, Si, was that? You reckon you could only do that on sand, or you reckon you could eke that out of it any day? Obviously, our speed difference is not Ricky Brabeck.
Yeah.
But...
Yeah, for sure. So 3 days on any terrain. That Michelin Desert Race is kind of like a pretty hard wearing tire. So, and yeah, for me, like where I am, and well, last time anyway, I was kind of trail riding a lot. So, you're never getting much heat into the tire, and it's kind of like just not doing a massive amount of work, so you can kind of eke it out. But yeah, that kind of 3 days on any terrain, really. Yeah.
Hey, I think it goes back to the budget. We've seen it with our good friend Mr. Neil Hawker riding Dakar this year. I think there was one day there where he made a point of his managing to look after his rear tyre and making it last another day. But when he's in Portugal with us and we're paying for the rear tyres, he goes through one a day.
And those are on street tyres, so it's really impressive. So the next subject, the safety thing, the only other bit is like with Toby's tyre split, it's quite impressive that it lasted that well. And I think one of the things we talked about a little bit on WhatsApp was that it kind of also raises the question of that fell over into a second part. There was a bunch of times on the TV, especially the Red Bull coverage, where he touched on being super tired because he was so stressed about the tyre situation. Obviously, he had a great day riding on that knackered tyre. How did that tyre last? So I don't really understand. It looked like the whole sidewall's gone. There should be no structure in it. The tyre looks like it should fail. Do you know? I don't know how it did. If you've got any insight into that, I would love to know. But also, the bigger picture, the bigger part of that is that whole process also made him really tired. And then the day after, he stood in the bivouac going, dude, I am knackered. Like, I haven't slept in 2 days now. And then he goes out. Do you know? You're tired anyway. You've got that brain slow down. You make a small mistake. And obviously, they're riding so far. So that's obviously a little bit of another point with that. Moving on, another big talking point, or maybe not a big talking point, but Henrik Forsberg made a good point. He says, Yamaha must have forgotten that they're supposed to build reliable bikes. And then someone actually asked a sensible question. What is going on with Yamaha's engines? So, Si, you're probably best placed to answer this because you were in and around the Yamaha camp a little bit last year when you rode.
Yeah, that's right. So last year I was with the French Dragon Tech team, which is basically like a satellite team for the factory team-ish kind of thing. They always park together in the bivouac and stuff like that. So I spent a lot of time kind of with those guys. So those factory bikes last year were doing a piston every 2 days. This year they had a new rule. You could only change a piston once during the race without a penalty, and every piston change after that was 15 minutes. So I was thinking coming into this race that was going to be a problem for those guys. And yeah, the only
You were
Yamaha
right.
to finish the race. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The only Yamaha to finish the race was in that Dragon Tech team that I'm with. So yeah, and two riders in Malamoto class, but they run a much more stock 450.
Yeah, it's a quite different bike that the two in Malmoto are running, hey?
Yeah, very, very different kit. Yeah.
So basically, we don't quite know what's going on, but their engines don't last very long at the moment.
Yeah, and it's, they'll take that very hard this year, and they'll hopefully spend a lot of time coming up with solutions, and hopefully they'll be back, because we all like a lot of riders in that team, so we want to see them do well.
And so do you think, you've probably got more experience with this, Dad, because you've kind of been on all types of bikes, literally. Do you think this is a specific problem that they have with the engine, or do you think this is just because they're trying to take an enduro bike and turn it into a world-leading rally bike? Also, someone has someone moving plates around in the background, so if we can stop that, please.
Okay. Lindley.
So, Lindley, stop moving plates in the background. And then secondly,
can you stop moving the plates around in the background?
This is a nice professional level podcast, isn't it?
Well, I'm a bit negative about it because it's obviously my dinner. So
maybe just do it a bit quieter.
It up a little bit. Yeah, what was the question? Yeah, the bikes. Yeah, so I know it is an interesting question, because I think, it was one of the big question marks when the whole 450 thing started to come, and obviously that came over a few years a little bit because everybody was unsure as to how the race was going to develop when it went from the big engines to the 450s, and it was quite strange, because at the start of that sort of 450 transition, the rule was as it is now: first engine change 15 minutes, second engine change big time. And for the first couple of years, everybody, all the factory riders, everybody just swapped their engine on the rest day. It was just how it was. Everybody took the 15 minutes. And then I can't remember who it was now, but there was one kind of good privateer on the KTM 450 rally bike that was in a quite strong position, somewhere around that top 10, that just went, well, I'm going to go for it. Didn't do the engine swap, made it to the end, and I can't remember where he finished, but kind of proved the point really a little bit. And then KTM kind of turned up the next year and went, yep, we're good, we've got this. But as you pointed out, their bike is not an enduro bike or a motocross bike with a kit on it anymore. It's a long way from that. It's built from the ground up as a rally engine. It's got some pretty expensive componentry, inside the engine, the Prankel crank, and, the crankcases are much more spacious, even though the top end's still a 450, and, a bunch of other stuff they do to make it very reliable. And it quite clearly is now, and the Honda's the same, isn't it? The Honda, they started with the 450X years ago before they kind of came with the factory team, and they were sort of dabbling and with a kit on the 450X, but then they've now turned up with this sort of full factory from the ground built, which is another subject because we don't quite understand how they get around the production rules with that. But, it is a built for rally motor like the KTM's one is. And, quite clearly it can go, both of those engines can go wide open for arguably 10,000 kilometers, with a lot of, a lot of load on the motor. I think that's another thing that's quite hard to understand when you haven't been out in the desert, and it looks like they're all going flat out in top gear. But a lot of the time in that terrain, there's a lot of back pressure on the engine, isn't it? The ground's, soft, and engine's working really hard, and they do it, and then you've got, the other end of the coin where Yamaha and the Sherco, albeit the Sherco was super reliable this year as well, but the Yamaha and the Sherco and kind of everybody else that's on a kit bike is an enduro bike with a kit, and to my detriment, I know how hard that is on an enduro engine.
Well, I think with the Sherco, we're not too sure on that anymore. It definitely was at the start, but that bike also currently seems to be really reliable. I mean, they win. I haven't seen it confirmed, but in theory, they win the historic manufacturer's award for having 100% finish record of all their riders. 3 start, 3 finish. I think for the Indian dude, maybe only just. I can never quite remember his name, but
he had problems today. Hey,
he had problems today, but also earlier in the race, he had a crash. Let's call it a crash. There was a little bit of footage from Javi Vuega Puerta from one of the fuel stops of the dude's bike annihilated, and the fuel tank was trying to say hello to the nav tower. I'll find it somewhere. I'm sure we can put that somewhere in a description. But if not, go check out his Instagram. It was definitely on there, and it was destroyed. But reliable bikes, so maybe not quite as stock as they once were, because they definitely had a bit of a problem with that for a while, didn't they? So Yamaha, they got some work to do, no doubt. No bikes at the finish, super embarrassing for a factory team. I'm sure they're not going to be stoked on that. I'm sure there's going to be some interesting conversations over a coffee and a baguette next Monday. Maybe Van Beveren walking across to KTM's headquarters and asking for a bike. So another.
I got a feel for him,
man. 4 in a row, no finish. 2 DNFs from crashes, 2 from exploded bikes. It's got hurt. So another really interesting topic, and I think this year, because of the way the race has been, they maybe got pushed aside a little bit in years when they wouldn't have. But there was one privateer in particular that has absolutely shone above and beyond in the last 2 years, and that's Skylar Howes. He's on a customer bike. He's on a bike that you or I could walk into a team and give them 80,000 euros and they would sort us out for the next 2 weeks. It's not a special situation he's in, and he's put it in the top 5. So I don't think any of us are questioning his ability to be consistent and navigate well and make smart decisions. He's clearly a really good rider, really doing things that other factory guys, Bereda, are struggling to do, which is make smart choices and get to the end of the race. Also, it would be interesting, Si, if you could look up how many Bereda hasn't finished. I bet that's more than half.
I think he's finished like 4 or 5, something like that.
Yeah, man. That's like nearly Heinz Kindergartner levels of bad record. Maybe equal to Nani Roma.
Best position in 5th.
Wow. So, the question is, and this is from Lawrence Hacking. Where is it? I've lost it. I'll pop it up on the screen. Who picks him up? He's got to be on a factory team next year, right? This isn't like a Svitko situation where he's sponsored by like Slovakian oil, so it doesn't matter if he's not on a factory team because he's probably got a better setup than most factory riders will ever have. Svitko hasn't been on a factory team because he's got an awesome situation. But Skylar Howes was like not in that situation. He's a normal dude with a normal job who's trying to make enough money to get there. So who picks him up?
I'd say Honda.
You think Honda? Because America?
Yeah. Because I think they need a 5th rider. And I think they'll see Howes being in America as like a good training partner for Ricky, and just ease of kind of getting him into the team, and that whole setup with Jimmy Lewis and Kendall Norman and Johnny Campbell and those guys. I don't know if Howes has been associated with many big brands in his career so far. Maybe there's a relationship there with Honda already, but.
So I asked this question of, we mentioned him earlier, Jesse Ziegler. I sent him a quite blunt Instagram message, was basically why is he not got a factory ride? And the answer was essentially that Skylar hasn't had much association. He has had help with the team he rode with last year, the Garrett off-road team, but situation in the States is that the type of desert racing that he does, there's no money in it. Like it's a real, even though they're pro level athletes, it's an amateur like sport essentially, where there's a little bit of help, some husky bucks, and that's it. There's no factory teams turning up to that kind of desert racing in the States. If you want to get on a factory team for desert racing in the States, you probably go to Baja, but that's not the kind of racing he does. He does Vegas to Reno, he does like Hare and Hounds, which are kind of almost point to point and back again races in the States. So there's no help there. So I don't know that he does have that big association, where Ricky Brabeck was already riding for the Honda team. So that transition is quite natural. So he's kind of probably got an open book. So here's another question. If Yamaha come knocking, a la they did with Ross Branch, they picked him up. Even though Ross was already riding for KTM, they picked him up. They gave him a factory ride. Do you take it? Do you take the money or do you take the privateer ride?
Yeah, but he hasn't even got a privateer ride, has he? From what it looks like on the stickers on his jacket and his bike and what he's saying, he's funded that like out of his heart and soul. So if he's going back after a top 5, he's got to get some help, hasn't he?
If I'm KTM, I'd pay for like his entry and subsidize his ride with Bass Trucks next year.
Or would you put him in like a Daniel Sanders situation where like Sanders is not a full-blown factory rider, like he's a KTM Australia rider, but they know he's good enough, so they put him under the tent. Do they do that? Or do they look at him and go, and they've done this in the past with other guys who were super good. A few years ago, you remember, like, is it Dabrowski and Progonsky, where they were like top 5 guys, but KTM helped them out. They gave them like the good bike, the good suspension, but they sent them off on their own. Like, here's the factory suspension, here's the bike when no one else has got it, but you're not part of this. Do they bring that back?
But they had those guys always came with their own sort of title sponsor. Do you know, like even Toby the first time and stuff like that. So it needs like KTM USA to foot that bill.
I mean, there's nothing wrong with that bus setup. It's basically a factory team. The organization, mechanics, awesome. The bike, those guys, and the HT Husky team. They're as close as a factory team as you're ever going to get. So he's obviously he's proved that this year that he's more than capable of delivering with that kind of slightly less than factory setup. So
yeah, totally,
very much. No, it was a super impressive ride. I don't think anyone can take anything away, because also it seems like he rides with a lot of maturity. Like I think Ross Branch is a great character, but his ride is. In the nicest possible way. It doesn't look like a ride of maturity. The big crash he had, we've talked about it quite a lot. If we go back and watch that crash, he says it wasn't happening until my chain came off. And there is a little bit of that, but he was having a big crash. Like, he was 2/3 of the way there before his bike broke. He hit a big old tump of camel grass at a big old speed. And then he hit another tump of camel grass, and then his chain broke and he crashed. But, so it doesn't.
Hey, what we need is some like wealthy guy out there to come and make a special team that we can all follow and all get behind, which would be like, with Ross Branch, Saltrate and Beretta, and just a special team that's going to give us stories. Forget about trying to win. Just
put a film crew in there.
Amazing.
Yeah, put a film crew in there, GoPro, like Lyndon Poskett style, everywhere, and just be like, right, your job today is just to win as many stages as possible, and then just let Beretta go each day.
Outrageous thing. Yeah.
And I think they should get special dispensation so Bereda can always start like 8th. Do you know? Because you know he's not going to win. Like, he's never going to win. I mean, they made a really... Jimmy Lewis made a really good joke on that podcast we listened to earlier, that with Bereda, you just need to tell him it's an 11-day race, not a 12-day one, and you'll be fine. And it's the same thing. Just don't let him win. He's not going to... Just send him out, man. See what happens. So... a couple of other good questions going on here. I think the other thing, Sanders, amazing first ride. Probably the best first rookie ride we've seen since Toby put it on the podium year 1. And maybe the gap is a little bit more than that was, but what a ride, man. Like, super good, huh?
Yeah. Had no doubt. I put him for outside shot at the podium right from the start. The guys are, I mean, if anyone's, just go and look at some of his footage of him riding in Oz. Guy's awesome, And he's a real character as well, isn't he? He's beasting lip and all that.
Yeah.
So, one of the other topics that has come up a lot, and it was really interesting, it came up quite a lot in the second week especially, was the speed. So it kind of ties into this whole safety thing we've been talking about. But when it comes to Dakar, I mean, the race has always been fast. It was super fast in Africa on ultimately now are terrible motorbikes. They were great then, but there's no convincing anyone that anyone other than Stefan Pethansel's bike in the 90s was a good bike. No one had one. So the race was fast then. People used to get really hurt all the time. People died. It's like always a sad thing when that happens. But last year was an exceptional event. We talked about this a lot at the start. The organizers had all these safety rules. And I think one of the things that I brought up in that situation was, and it kind of irked me a little bit, like this is a bit of a personal rant, but it irked me a little bit that in all the conversations about safety, it felt a tiny bit like ASO were blaming everyone else for laying plates out on the counter in the back of the video. I'm joking. That was a little bit of a dig there. No, we're blaming everyone else for taking it was the riders needed to take responsibility, where we're going to make it so that the riders have to navigate better and the riders have to ride slower because their tires are now worse and the riders have to wear an airbag. And we'll make it so that the riders have to go slower by putting some compulsory speed zones in. But then this year, and a few of the factory competitors, including Quintanilla and Volkner and Leia Sands and Sam Sunderland, have all mentioned in quite a lot of disdain how fast this race was. And it wasn't so much an anecdotal thing. The numbers back that up, right?
I haven't seen much of the average speeds compared to last year, but yeah, just looking from the footage and stuff like that, and like you said, the interviews with the factory guys, and yeah, it looked like it was just the same as last year, and the ASO had done nothing on their to-do list in terms of the safety. They just put it all on the riders. So yeah.
I mean, it seems to me like it's madness. Just because they came out in one of their safety improvements, and that they said, one of the improvements is we're going to control the course and make the course more technical. Which when it went from Africa to South America, that was one of the things that we all felt was great, that the terrain and the way they laid the route out made it more technical. And even to the point of the separation of the bikes and cars a little bit more did add to safety. But interesting to me, maybe not interesting to anyone else. But so we were all talking about, back in Africa, it was always fast, and it feels like this is a bit more like Africa than South America. But I had a little look back at the first Dakar I did at the speed averages there, which Peter Hansel won on the Super Tenere twin cylinder, super fast bike.
750 twin.
Average 750 twin, yeah. Supposedly everyone going flat out across the desert, and pretty much every special except one was I would say, a lot slower. And of course, you can't compare because the bikes were different. The bikes are incredible now. They're only 450s, but their top speed's probably not much different to back in that day, and they obviously handle a lot better. But yeah, with one exception, there was one special that was super fast, which me only won, which was 160 kilometre an hour average, which is insane.
Was that just like a flat lake bed or something?
It must have been. I literally don't remember that stage that year, but 478 kilometres he did in 2 hours and 56.
What? That's got to be a timing error. There's no way.
But
It's mental.
No, my average was over 110 on that XR600, which I don't remember it going much faster than that. So
I don't think any XR600 goes faster than 110.
So, but over the rest of the rally, it was only 80 kilometres an hour. You know, including that stage. You know, the average for the whole rally was 80. We're taking out the European stages. I didn't count them. But yeah, for the most part, you know, the averages were all sort of 70, 80 kilometres an hour. And I think this year, you know, we've seen obviously some that have been, you know, around about 100 or under 100. But there's also been, several days, I think there's been 3, hasn't there, where it's been like 125 average. And we've seen on the telly on those days, the guys wobbling around in second gear in a rock field. So that means a lot of the day they're going very fast. And, as we said, speed isn't the only, that in itself isn't dangerous. We've had plenty of times when going flat out is safe. It's not safe to go very, very fast in, areas where there's a lot of hidden traps.
Well, and I think one of the other things we talked about as well is the adjustment that when you have sustained speed for a really long time, and anyone that's done any kind of time in a desert, anyone that's time in any desert, or if you go and ride your motorbike on a track, you have the same experience, you get adjusted to that speed. So if you've been doing 160 kilometers an hour and suddenly you need to go down to something that's a 50 kilometer an hour obstacle, even if you've got time to see it and deal with it, the process of that, and I think this is probably quite hard to write a road book from a car. The process of that is really difficult because you're so used to the world going by at that speed. You process everything at such an intense speed that you get that judgment wrong all the time. Like you have it, right? Like it's a thing. I've definitely suffered from that, where I've been doing 130 kilometers an hour for the last 20 minutes. And then all of a sudden there's a whoop and I'm like, I can jump that, but I definitely can't. It gets wild. And you have these moments where you're like, whoa, careful there, Tiger. But I'm not even that fast. I'm not fast. So can you imagine what that's like when you're, the year I did Dakar, my bike's top speed was 165. The Volkner's top speed this year was over 180. That even that gap, speed is not a linear increase in how it feels to you. It's exponential, isn't it? So I can only imagine those sustained stages with that also create a problem of just poor judgment of how fast you're actually going. I would imagine anyway.
Yeah, certainly.
So
what about the road book?
What about the road book? Well, it seems like, and this was, something, Si, you talked about just before we started, was the relation. I mean, you should probably talk about this more. It was your subject, and I've stolen it. But the relationship of how the navigation issue changed over the course of the week. So week 1, massive yo-yoing. No one knows how to read the road book or what's going on. They're leading out and hemorrhaging time. And we were a bit unsure as to what that was at the rest day. But then week 2, that's almost gone by the end of week 2. The Honda guys especially are very capable of leading out and only losing places like 6 minutes, 4 minutes, not a lot. The 2 guys behind them maybe catch them and they hold their own for the rest of the day. So what changed? There's a little bit, Si, where you've been to the various parts of Saudi Arabia now, and Dad, you've watched a million Dakars where these things have happened. So what do you think's going on there?
I think the biggest factor in those first few days was the terrain that they were in was pretty intricate with lots of complicated navigation. And also, at the start of the rally, there's just so many fast guys that can all go not far off the same pace. So obviously, there's kind of like top few at the top, and then beneath that, there's like 20, 30 guys who can all go ballistically quick. And when you've got that many people still in the race after 3, 4, 5 days, that person that's leading out is losing time, and there's 20, 30 people who can go quicker than them. Obviously, as the race goes on, you get people gradually dropping off. And yeah, by the time you get to day 9, 10, 11, 12, there were only, the guy leading out was going to get 6 or something like that, just because there just aren't that many people left in the race that can run that pace, which is, similar to Dakars of the past, when there was only kind of a few guys who could run that pace from day one, whereas now there's like 20 or 30 of them. So, and I think I don't know if this is true or not, but I heard a couple of guys say that the road books just kind of felt different in terms of the kind of layout of the boxes and the kind of style of the writing and stuff like that. So, from the sounds of it, I think it just took guys a few days to kind of get used to it. And then you got like I think it was stage 10, was it, when Ricky kind of led out most of the stage and still won it. So yeah, lots of factors there, but yeah.
Very good answer. So this is a fantastic question. And I think one that you've probably both got a bit of an answer to, from Louise Mitchell. Does psychology/sociology, big words for us, impact the group at the beginning until everyone has sorted themselves out? I.e. with roadbook, terrain, prep, order in the race, and so on.
Yes, massively.
Okay. Explain. Elaborate.
I'm sure there's a lot of that going on at the front of the field. There's a lot of head games, no question. But down where I've ridden in that kind of mid-pack bit, for sure, because you've got in that first 4 or 5 days, there's a real big sorting out of pecking order. There's a lot of egos, and a lot of people trying to work out where they sit in the grand scheme of things. And what you don't see on the TV is that as soon as you're out of that, I can't remember what the numbers are now, so I'll know for sure, but as soon as you're out of that kind of front group, then everybody starts getting set off 2 riders at a time. So you're set into like a motocross race at the morning of a 500 kilometer special. So, you've got this thing where you want to be faster than the guy next to you.
I think it's after 30th place, everyone starts 2 at a time.
Yeah. Okay. And
it might
then
be 40th, but yeah, something like that.
I think they changed that for this year. Hey, I think they were just like every 30 seconds now.
Okay.
It was some days. It was still 2 bikes, and some days it was
really?
and at 30 seconds. Yeah.
Okay.
And but even without that, you've still got that pecking order thing going on, and everybody's sort of sets out with whether they admit it or not, sets out with a little sort of goal in their mind where they think they can, where they think they can be in the race. But then as it sort of starts to settle down and people start crashing out in front of you, you start to then think about the finish and the finish line, and then all your goal is to get yourself into a clean bubble every day and stay out of trouble. So you want to be like going at a speed that's comfortable for you, but with the guys that are faster than you disappearing, and you're happy about that then, but you still want to be faster than the guys behind you. So there's definitely still this game that goes on, but the game changes, day by day for sure. And then there's a bit of a weird reset because you have the rest day, and everyone that's made it to the rest day thinks they're a winner, so they go out the day after the rest day and the whole thing starts all over again.
And they think they've finished.
Yeah.
You get to the rest day, you're like, I'm done, I'm there, I'm finished.
I've nailed it.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you probably have, like, in a really microcosm way, a similar experience whenever you go on like a really big group ride. Do you know? If you do a multi-day group ride or like something with 20 people, the first day everyone's like, whoa, and they ride like crazy, and then after a few days it all settles down and you sort yourself out. It's kind of the same dynamic, right? In like a much bigger way with people riding incredibly fast. So a couple of comments to come back to here, and this is a little bit of an oversight on our part, I think. What about Gas factory team, or maybe Husky factory team for Skylar? I would, if I was Gas, he's probably the best free agent, right? You'd put him on
without a doubt.
It's a great shout, Brian.
You got to wonder how many years Laya wants to kind of continue for. She's done 11 now, so
I think she's done. I think that was her last one. I'd be surprised if she came back. I think she in a car. Definitely. Because also this is interesting. She's doing that. I don't know what's it called? Extreme E with Carlos Sainz. She's in a team with Carlos Sainz in Extreme E, which is E Rally Raid Electric Championship with one female driver, one male driver, and they swap around. I don't know the rules, but it sounds cool. And interestingly, that's where the girl in the side-by-side class is Sebastian Loeb's partner. And he got her that drive. It was on the Red Bull TV. It's quite cool. And she also seems like a legit driver. Won a stage. First female to win a stage on Dakar since Jutta Kleinschmidt. Way back when.
Awesome.
And then the other question, which I have now lost, was just about Volkner. And what a good ride he had, in spite of his mysterious, maybe not so mysterious, definitely someone messed up his clutch and there was something in there that shouldn't have been in there, or something that wasn't in there. He said about it really vaguely with a slightly grumpy look on his face, while he was also complaining about how fast the race was and how much that was annoying him. It was a great interview. You should go out. If you haven't watched any of the Red Bull TV coverage, you should go back, because the bit that they don't do well is the coverage of the actual riding, but the bit they do very well is all the stuff in the pits. I think they do a great job of that, much better than Eurosport. There are some great interviews on there, including Laya's one, where she moans very fairly, but she moans. So my last question about the bikes, and this is something that we've also talked about. We do a lot of talking on WhatsApp about Dakar, but was about KTM and the situation they're now in, where they're not winning, and why that is, etc. So have you got any theories about what it is that KTM are now lacking, whether it is their bike, whether it's their riders, whether it's bad luck, and whether they need to change something?
I think we'll see another, quite a lot of change to their bike for next year. I think, the races in Saudi now, it's obviously is a little bit different. It's always hard to tell, but to me, when I watch on the TV, it definitely looks like it kind of moves around and the suspension doesn't seem to be working quite as well as the Honda. And a couple of the riders definitely commented on that as well. Quintanilla in particular.
Very publicly.
Was quite vocal about it. And, we've seen he's a guy that can win, and he wasn't near the front. Geez, I don't know. They're all going to keep trying to win, aren't they? So they didn't actually have a terrible year this year, but their results aren't there.
Well, I think where it would probably be frustrating if you were KTM is that in the past, the way that they've managed the race is they've managed to put 3 really high level riders right there at the end. Every year, whether it was a Husky or a KTM, for the last 20 years. Even last year, they were there. This year,
well, they littered the top 10, didn't they? And look, they've still got 3, 4, 5, but
Yeah, but 5, I feel like 5 doesn't count because it's not their decision that's happened. You know,
No.
Skylar got there on his own with some duchies. But yeah, I think that's. Someone said, "Wait, who won?" I missed it. You definitely missed it. I woke up and I was like, "That is not what I was expecting." Kevin Benavidez won, the first ever South American, which also we talked about before this race, and even 2 days ago, none of us were like, yeah, Kevin's going to win, man. He's going to be the first South American. It was Quintanilla. He's like the golden child. He's definitely the one that's got the skill to win. And then 2 days ago, we were all sat there and we were like, Nacho's got this, man. He looks good. And then he did not look good. So, yeah.
Yeah.
So, here's a good question.
Hey, he's definitely going to be a proper contender next year, though, isn't he? There's no question.
Without a doubt.
Nacho.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nacho Libre. Yeah, he is. And so this also raises another subject of the dynamic now in the Honda team, because I think before the race, Ricky Brabec was number one guy. He had the number one on his bike. He's the first Honda to win since 1988 or whatever it was, a really long time. And he believed quite clearly that he was number one. Do you know, there's no doubt in his race at the start. This was a race between him and Toby Price, and everyone else was just getting in the way. And he even treated it a bit like that in week one. It seemed like, from our perspective, we're European. We have ways of saying and doing things that are different to him. And so now they have this dynamic where Nacho kicked their butt for 10 days. Bereda is a lunatic and apparently hasn't got a contract next year, but is still won more stages than any other Honda rider. Or maybe him and Brabec were tied with 3 each. I'm a bit confused about that. But anyway, but also then Kevin is now current reigning Dakar. We'll just call him Rally World Champion because nobody cares about the actual championship. Like he's the king of the Bing now, and especially today, he took it, like he stood there right next to Ricky, and he absolutely, like, he owned it. Do you know? He had all the pressure on his shoulders, and when that pressure was there, he just rode off into the distance with his middle finger up. So what does that do to that dynamic now? Like, does it go to like a Cyril Coma situation where the team splits and you have this weird thing where no one wants to work? Because at the moment it seems like they'll work together. Do you know, they've got that real kind of motocross style thing where they all train together. They're out in the desert in California riding together, doing road books and just loving life because Ricky's the big dog. But now Ricky's not the big dog anymore. There's another one in the room, 2 in the room. What does that do? In KTM, they manage this really well. I don't know how they do it because in no other motorsport they manage to. But do you think Ricky now has like a bit of an ego about this as well, and he like starts to segregate off, or do you think that it stays the same and everyone's happy as Larry and they're all just glad they're alive? So many questions. Sorry, that was.
I think it'll just motivate Brabec just to kind of like come back stronger next year and go off and train with his little crew up in the hills and come back and hope to smash them next year. But
so do you think, because him and Nacho seem like they're pretty tight as well, you know, they share the truck together, they train together a lot, do you think that stays? Do you think he keeps training with him, or do you think he like
sorry, John, sorry.
Yeah, I think so. I think they'll carry on training together. They seem like too good of friends to let that kind of affect it.
I think it's a part of the reason why there's so many guys at that speed now, because you know we've seen it in Supercross and motocross as well. It's one of the real changes in the modern era of racing, where you know not so long ago people like to be in their own corner and train their own way and keep their methods secret and sort of you know do all that stuff their way behind closed doors a little bit. But definitely it's changed dramatically, you know, in motocross and supercross now, where the top guys are going out and practicing and training together, and all their levels coming up together, you know, and they're happy to to take that to the practice track and then take it to the racetrack. And I think the same things happened with rally. Well, it's not even like the Honda team training together, all those fast groups of guys that are in the same corner of the world are riding and training together. Van Beveren's riding with Sam, and in the States, Shorty he's on a Yamaha, but he's out riding with Brabec, and those guys are just, they're good mates that ride bikes really well, and they're at a similar level, and they go out and have a crack with their training, and I think that stays. I think that's why there's so many fast guys at the front, because they're all doing that. They all know what the line is when they come to the start line.
Yeah, well, there you go. Someone added a very... Maybe they need to limit the amount of cable ties you're allowed to have in the race. Maybe that's where it should be.
Yeah, that would be me out. I know 100% that on my first Dakar I used a 97 because I took a bag of 100 and came back with 3.
You're just making like daisy chains of cable ties or something. I just put it, you guys probably didn't see this, but I put it up on the screen a second ago from Mr. Lurado, maybe. I apologize for murdering that. I don't believe Honda has ranks in their pilots. Their error was that they relied on Bereda as their number one in previous Dakars, and that's what's helping them to adapt. Apart from the fact they have Paulo Goncalves, but I totally agree. No one should be relying on Bereda. He's great, man. Like, what good value he is. Him and De Sautre and Ross Branch would literally, like you say, be the best thing ever. But you can't be putting him in as your number one rider. So anyway, another good question. What about Van Beveren? Obviously, the last couple of years, Van Beveren started driving cars a little bit. And someone else asked this about Toby as well. So they're at the further end of their careers. Toby is 32, maybe. I'm making this up. Van Beveren is 30. Maybe they don't want to keep racing rallies year in, year out. Toby's broke 30 bones in his life now. Firstly, does Van Beveren stay on a Yamaha? He's been there for years. And would he be better if he went on one of the other factory teams? Or do you think those two, we're done with that, we're going to go drive cars now?
I think Van Beveren stays with Yamaha. I think his relationship with them is like too strong. He's a kind of like a lifetime one brand career kind of thing. He's their kind of star boy, and he was their biggest hope going into this race, and I think he's still their biggest hope going forward. I think those guys have a fair few years left on bikes before they go to cars.
Because Toby's like a part-time professional car driver now anyway. It seems like he's always racing trophy trucks and so on. Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
So there was another really good question here. Can you think of another fast Kevin since Kevin Schwantz, before Kevin Benavides came along?
We do.
A real fast one, not a we know this bloke called Kevin.
Crazy Scottish one.
yeah, not the crazy Scottish one, like a legit world-class Kevin since Schwantz.
I know. There was what was the name of that big bird in Up? That was Kevin, wasn't it? In that Disney movie.
I didn't even know there was a bird in Up, and I've definitely watched it. That's random. If anyone knows anything about Up, the film, chuck it in the comments.
Or Fast Kevin.
Or Fast Kevin, yeah. Any Fast Kevins we're missing out on. There's got to be a Fast Kevin in MotoGP in there. So, were there any other wild questions, interesting questions in here? There's been some good ones. Cy Hewitt or Cy Pavey, how do you finance Dakar?
That's a good question. Well, for me last year, I had kind of two methods of sponsorship. So I had like the corporate sponsorship kind of route where I had companies have their logo on my bike and kind of promote them through social media and on my kit and stuff like that. And then I also had like the kind of personal sponsorship. So for people just fans of Dakar or fans of me or whatever, and they could purchase like a sponsorship pack through my website where they get a pack through the mail before Dakar with like a t-shirt and some goodies. And then another one after Dakar as well with a signed picture with a bit of road book and some goodies from the race and stuff like that. Different sponsorship levels got different perks, and yeah, that's how I paid for it last time. And I'll you'd be using largely the same system to go again in 22.
Cool, man.
So where can they find out about that then, Si?
They can they
I'll
can
help you
find
out.
out all about it through my website simonhewitt.com or through the Facebook page, which is Simon Hewitt Dakar 2022.
Nice.
So I've got some other interesting questions here. Do you think at the moment Daniel Sanders can actually navigate, or did he just follow everyone else wide open? And did the bee sting improve the way he looks or detract from the way he looks? That was my own question. I just made that up. No one asked that. So this is on Instagram, so I can't put it on the screen. Sorry. Again, that was from Lawrence Hacking.
Come on, Lawrence. You know he can navigate. Doesn't matter where you are in the field. If he's going that fast and finding the way, he's working it out, and he's obviously fast enough. He's got time to still look at the road book. He's on it.
He is on it.
Yeah.
So the one other question, and I think this is one of the sadder points of the whole race, is that there was another fatality this year. And we talked a lot about safety already, and one of the things that the organisers quite clearly wanted to change was they don't want people passing away. It's not good for anyone. And we've talked a lot about this in private. It's quite a sad thing, really. I forget his last name. It was Pierre
Chipin.
Yeah, so he crashed on stage 7 and went to hospital, was put into a coma, I believe, and passed away on his way back to France this morning. As far as I can tell from the information, he actually passed away on the plane, which is incredibly sad, but it also raises the question that we've talked about already of the speed and the consequences that has further down the line, that ASO / the organisers have got some stuff to do, really. I think, we talked about it a lot because people did pass away from other things in South America, but this was before there was an organization change, and they really addressed that issue once it was clear that it was a problem and people were passing away from heat related issues. They just put a ban on riding when it was over a certain temperature. They cut a line in it, they drew it, they made some really hard decisions to cut difficult stages short, and it was unfair. It happened to you and I, Dad, the year we went. It was very unfair, but they took that call anyway to make it safer, and still someone passed away, and so they moved that line again. So what do you think they do in Saudi Arabia with the terrain they've got? How do they go about preventing this happening?
I think they need to do a proper, I don't know if they've done this or not, but like a proper investigation into the two fatalities last year and the Pierre's crash this year, and also CS Santosh's crash this year when he was put into a induced coma as well. I think he's doing a lot better now though. But yeah, look into those 4 crashes, see if there was a common factor or anything like that, because it could well be that it was in a dangerous place, or there was there was something that can be done to make things safer in the future, or it could well be that these were just 4 unlucky, unfortunate, and tragic events that just so happened to come at the in a short period of time, in 12 months. There's a lot of people that will say that it's the fault of Saudi Arabia, it's the fault of the terrain, the organizers, and all that kind of stuff. But
I say that.
Yeah, and correlation doesn't always equal causation. It's
big words.
You have to look at each case individually and see if the terrain actually played a part in that crash.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think the only kind of countenance I have to that, and this is coming in from that position of I'm an armchair fan. I'm not in the race, and I'm only applying personal experience to this and then extrapolating wildly to arrive at a conclusion, which, as you say, is not it's not like a scientific approach to it. But there's a couple of things that I've seen that, from a fan's point of view, and maybe you guys, you've also got some desert riding experience, to me, that are scary situations to be in. Like, one of them is whenever you have anything blind in the desert, it's terrifying to ride in that environment. It's sketchy whenever you can't see the obstacle coming, and then it happens quickly because desert riding is fast. It makes me nervous, and that was quite clearly one of the incidents that happened last year with the Dutch diet guy, whose name, unfortunately, I've forgotten. I don't know if one of you two remember, but his incident, Edwin, and his incident happened on a fast piste with small dune sets of 20 foot that come after really fast sections of riding, but you're always riding towards the slack side of the dune, so you can't see the downside of it coming. And it makes great TV, but we saw it in the cars last year as well, and we saw multiple crashes from it in the bikes. That was sketchy. And I think, from my experience of riding in those terrains, if I was in that situation and you're riding towards those dunes and there's dust and the sun is a bit low, any of those factors, it immediately becomes like the sketchiest thing in the world. Riding in the desert into the dust, in the sun, at speed, horrific. Riding towards holes, dunes that you can't see, also horrific. And we saw some horrendous car crashes from it. We talked about it earlier in the day, but Alonso, one of the world's greatest ever Formula One drivers, had to deliberately roll his car down a dune to not have an enormous crash, which was quickly followed by a less experienced driver just driving off it and breaking his back. And there's always some fault in the operator of the vehicle, but it's a terrifying situation. Like, that's something that you could, in theory, as a bike rider, go, marking this course out, oh, man, that's sketchy. I wouldn't want to ride wide open towards the slip side of a dune. That would make me nervous. And the guy running Dakar now is Castera, is an amazingly experienced, incredibly good rider. You think he would have some perspective on that as well. But they did the same thing this year. Do you know, those stages were still there. They still did those same things. Maybe they changed a little bit of it, but that's where, as like an outsider with a wildly uninformed opinion, you might go, that looks sketchy. I don't know that that's a good thing to do. Do you know? That's my little bit out there. I don't know if you two have got anything to say on that, but having super fast stages comes with some element of risk. It was only a few years ago we said, like, when stages were over 100 k's an hour average speed, we were like, wow, that's mental. 100 k's an hour for a whole day. That's faster than the fastest other desert races. And now we're like, today was 125 kilometers an hour average speed. So those are the things I think that you can only question the organizers on. I don't run Dakar. I don't know the challenges that come with that as well. I don't lay out rally routes. I'm just a dude that rode through a desert a couple of times and goes, man, that shit's sketchy. So, you take that with a pinch of salt. So here's an interesting question. This is a couple of questions popped up during my rant there.
Well, there was time.
There was time. Yeah, no, because I think it's a valid point though. You know, we have to have that discussion, because otherwise, if nobody's holding anyone accountable, when you have to ask the question. So we've got two questions here about helmets, which are really, really interesting. The first one is from Josip Lazic. I hope I said that right. Maybe they should develop new helmets for Dakar, because they're crashing with insane speeds wearing dirt bike helmets. And dirt bike helmets are, in theory, depends on the brand you wear, but designed for speeds between 30 and 60 miles an hour. That's their operating range, where a bicycle helmet would be less, and a street bike helmet generally a bit stiffer in theory. So do you think this is one of those situations where a street bike helmet would have helped, or is this one of those situations where there's something else that they could be doing?
Do you know what? It's funny that's been brought up, actually, because I was actually thinking about that earlier today with that whole bit I brought up with the airbags and the concussion, because it is a very valid point, and I don't know enough about helmet design, but it's certainly one of the things that we've talked about a lot with enduro and motocross, that off-road helmets have actually, in the last 10 years, have gone in a different direction in terms of safety from your road helmet, where you're typically looking at you're not worried about the concussion, you're worried about the one massive impact into Armco and potentially saving someone's life, whereas a dirt bike helmet is been down that direction, where they're looking a lot more at these sort of more mild concussions and reducing that. So it is a great question. I don't know what the answer is, but it's definitely probably it is another part of that equation, isn't it, when we're getting these concussions, but they're concussions from big impacts, not from falling over in a muddy rut at fourth gear down a lane kind of thing.
Well, one of our patrons just commented on Patreon as well, that an interesting kind of thought process of this, that maybe the airbag is also accentuating that because it makes you bounce. So if you go through that process of bouncing off the ground, like you see happens in MotoGP a bit, they do bounce when they hit the ground in an airbag, which obviously is good for energy dissipation, but then also creates that. And this is one of those things they talked about a lot when it comes to concussion with helmets, is the way in which your head moves. I'm doing a little whipping motion here. The way in which your head whips is what causes the concussion. It's not necessarily the actual hit. It's the kind of whiplash motion of the helmet bouncing off the ground, which is, they call it rotational energy, right? Which is where the kind of bell flex system and the MIPS system that you get in a lot of dirt bike helmets and other things like that are starting to come in. The 6D helmet, which no one in rally wears. And quite interestingly, if you're not sponsored by Bell or 6D or Layat, all the other rotational energy helmet systems are MIPS, which is kind of the most simplistic way of managing concussion rotation. It's completely anecdotal, but the last concussion I had was in a MIPS helmet. So that's obviously not really the point, but yeah. So it's a really good question. And so the last one that I've got here is from Lasse. What's your take on the new way / timing of releasing the roadbook? Do you think that had an effect on the navigation, and how much effect does that have on the safety side of it?
From my perspective, last year they gave us the roadbook in the morning on 6 of the days, and I always preferred those. Whenever they gave us the roadbook the day before, it's always like that's an hour or two of your evening gone, and obviously the factory guys spend a lot of time going over the roadbook, marking it up and trying to memorize bits of it, and yeah, I think for them it was probably a safety factor, but getting it in the morning. But for most of the riders, like I said, I can only speak for myself. I was always looking forward last year to the day when we got it in the morning, because it was just a pain in the ass getting it the night before. So yeah, that's my experience anyway.
What about you, Dad?
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree. For anyone that's not on that elite rider list, I think it's a proper win, because it's more time to sleep and recover, and that's more important. Before this year's rally, definitely all the front guys were like forward as well. That they all spoke very positively about it. It'll be interesting to hear what they've got to say now, because obviously there was a lot of discussion early on about how complicated the navigation was. And it would just be interesting to hear what they've got to say. I mean, for me, what I saw, again, anecdotally being the armchair expert, I don't think that was what made the navigation more difficult for them. I think it was more getting into the head of the person writing the road book, which is always a little bit of a story at the start of every rally. And it seemed from the pictures that we saw of people's road books that, they were very much putting a lot more information into one box. Like, there was definitely quite a few times when I looked at sections of road books and gone, in past years that would have been 2 instructions, and they jammed it all into one. And that seemed more the difficulty to me than getting it just before the start.
Yeah, no, look, carnage. Do you know? And even when you're trying to ride, if you ride slowly to read a box that's overwritten, you try and read all the words. Firstly, they're in Franglish, which is unhelpful, but also it's just hard to take it in. The whole thing vibrates a little bit. You're trying to read the ground and read this road book with stones and uphill and downhill and a ditch and turn left and go right and then follow this vague cap heading. And it's just a lot to take in. Even if you ride well within yourself, a complicated road book note is a complicated road book note. If you stood there just in front of it and read it all, it'd take you like 3 or 4 seconds, and then you look up at the track and go, which way was that again? And a few of the riders mentioned it later in the week as they got tired, and maybe this is another side effect of the roadbook being hard to read, is that it was hard to remember. You're using so much mental energy to process those complicated notes each time that when you're already fatigued, you know what it's like. It's hard enough anyway, so when you add that into the mix with the notes being complicated and being overwritten and close together, sometimes it's just too much to process. It'll be interesting, yeah, like you say, to hear what they say about that further down the line. Another question from Stephen Stiles, which is not another one, it's his first one, but on the helmet discussion and concussion, do you have to add dehydration into that as an element? So I think that's double-edged, really. Is it hot enough in Saudi Arabia at this time of year for that to be a serious discussion, like it was in South America? Is there altitude there? And how much does that dehydration just naturally over the course of the race affect your ability to concentrate and read the road book and then not have crashes? Like, for both of you, really, that's a kind of parts of that you can both answer.
It was another little one that I can't remember what day it was. I don't know if you spotted it, but Daniel Sanders crashed and burst his camelback open 50 k's into a stage one day and still finished on the podium that day or in the top 5 or something. I thought that was pretty impressive. But the other thing we didn't know until halfway through the rally is that you don't have to carry any emergency water anymore, which was a brand new thing that none of us spotted until, like I say, halfway through.
Which maybe I'm being ignorant and sticking to my guns because nobody likes anything to change in life, but that seems mental. Like, there's so much reliance on someone pulling you out of the desert if something goes wrong, or if you make that choice that something has gone wrong, but I'm going to tough this out, and you're out there all day and all night. there's no self-sufficiency attached to having no emergency water. And it's not very common that people use it, but it does happen. Like the year we went, there was a Kiwi dude who did the same thing. He sat down to have a little bit of a moment under a tree, and a thorn went in his camelback, and he ran out of water, and it put him out of the race because it was hot, and then he got dehydrated, and they were like, well, dude, you got to go home. Like, you're not okay. So it's kind of an interesting point that with all the other safety rules that they've put in, they've suddenly taken out these 3 liters of water. And also the side note of that is that the way in which the different bikes store water, now you've got this Sai on when you went to Mazuga on your enduro bike, you stored your emergency water in the swing arm. So you cut a hole in it, bung it up, and that's how Honda stored their emergency water. Now, having 3 liters of water in your swing arm is definitely going to affect how your bike works. So that's also a really interesting decision that they've removed that rule. So here's a really good question from Lassie again. What's the reason for such a big difference in the style of roadbook? What changes in the way roadbooks are written, and is it not the same people who write the roadbook every year?
I don't know if it's the same people every year. It must have changed at some point over the last 43 years, obviously. But yeah, when we talk about the style of roadbook, it's just like the things that are mentioned and the frequency of the notes. Sometimes someone who likes to write a particularly intricate roadbook would have like more boxes explaining the same amount of terrain than someone who writes not such a intricate roadbook. And when you go and do different events, like we've done Sarah's Rally in Greece, and those roadbooks will be written differently to Mazuga Rally in Morocco, which will be slightly different to Dakar. And yeah, it could be, obviously in those 3 instances, it's different people writing the road books, but even between last year in Dakar and this year in Dakar, they could have had some direction from Castera or something to mention more of the dangers, or make, wherever was a 1 danger last year, make it a 2 danger this year, and that kind of thing. So that's what we mean by like the style of the roadbook, just to answer that part of the question.
Yeah, it's what the person writing it, everyone's observation is a little bit different, isn't it? So it's like you're driving down the street and the instruction is turn left at the fire hydrant, but you drive down the street and you turn left at, someone might write turn left at the fire hydrant, someone else might write the same road book and say turn left at the tree with the orange flowers. Do you know? Both those things are on the same corner, but somebody observes it in a different way.
And sometimes those things can be super obscure, like turn left at the white rock by the sand dune in the middle of the desert.
100%. Yeah. And it can be as vague as that, can't it? The little pile of white rocks. And then the first 2 bikes drive over the pile of white rocks.
Well, I think the other thing that came up quite a bit as well, and you mentioned this earlier today, Sai, is that in Saudi, because it's a much more open desert environment than a lot of South America was, and you have this situation with a lot of crossing tracks and tracks that head off in various directions, we also have that situation where a lot of the cap headings are not precise because the track is not straight. It's not like you're on a lake bed and it's go at 180 degrees on your compass for 5K. It'll say 180 degrees average, and that's a bit where some of the nav is tricky because you don't quite know which one is the 180 degree average one. You have 4 options and one of them is going to be right, but you're never quite sure. And that's maybe that situation you've seen on the TV in the first week, especially, where they're riding around and trying to figure out which quite track is the right one. And I suppose when you're at ground level, that gets worse as well. My little experience of riding in South America, the riverbeds, you have that situation as well, where there's like 5 4x4 tracks in a riverbed. And I only knew which one to take because I was the 60th rider that day. but I was definitely riding along going, well, this is right, but I don't know how they know it was right because there's 84 tracks in here. So maybe that's also a big part of it. So here is a really good question about the risk level that you choose to take. So it's from Rob Mays. I assume course setting will always be a balance between the risk and the challenge. Assume the rider decides on the level of risk they are prepared to take? Question mark.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, yeah, to a point, but sometimes that's very difficult, isn't it? The terrain's put in front of you, and the risk is also sometimes hard to manage because of dust and trucks and cars and other bikes. You can't always make the choice you want to make. Sometimes you choose to go faster than you want to ride to get past a quad, to get out of its dust, to ultimately make it safer. But you have to go through this window of risk to do that. That can happen very easily when you have a problem and you end up having to start behind the trucks, for example.
Wow. There's a story in there, isn't there? I remember that well. So I suppose the other point within that conversation as well is that with Dakar, there is a degree of faith that you put in the organisers, because to stay in the race, you cannot just bimble along at a nice, safe speed. It's not possible. The race will disappear off into the distance. We saw that this year with who appears to be the nicest man in the world, Mr. Alexandra Bispo, as the race left him behind twice. And it's a good example that, if you're not an exceptionally good rider, your level of is that port you're drinking? Oh,
yeah, well, we couldn't go to Portugal, but fortunately we had a leftover bottle from last year.
Your
Donna Antonia.
Your Skype background cannot handle that. It doesn't know what to draw the line around. But yeah, that was kind of my point, is that there is a requisite speed to finish Dakar. You've still got to do 5,000 kilometers in 11 days. And that, if you ride too slowly, you just don't keep up, and it gets dangerous again because you're out for so long, you get tired. You're always playing that game a little bit with keeping up, not burning too much energy, being fit enough to deal with it, and keeping up with the race. And if the race just naturally has some sketchy bits in it and they don't manage that well. And the year we went to Dakar together in 2015, there was one particular really short section where it was horrendously dangerous. And I remember getting to the end of it and being really angry because generally the Dakar road book is super reliable. Like, of all the rallies I've done, by far the most reliable road book, super accurate, consistent. They make great changes. And there was one stage where, for a start, the helicopter followed me, which tells you everything you need to know about what they know about that stage. If a helicopter's following me, it's because they're waiting for me to crash. But it was, and I think you said you had this a lot last year as well, Si. It was just a really vague instruction. It was 10 kilometers and it said dangerous for 10 kilometers.
Yeah.
And basically the way it was almost like an old flash flood riverbed where the plane looked completely flat, but then out of nowhere there'd be like a sharp drop. And you'd be following this track, not even going fast, and then suddenly hole. And there were so many of them, they didn't put them in the road book. But the thing that made it really sketchy was that game you were talking about playing, of not wanting to get stuck in slower people's dust because you still need to make your own ground. You don't want to play that game where you're then riding at a pace that's too slow for you and you stop concentrating. There was an old railway track next to the main piste. It's off the road book, but everyone that did that stage the year before, or everyone that was from Chile, knew that was there. And they sat on this old raised above the road railway line, and they did 120 kilometers an hour. And on the piste, you were maybe doing 60. There's a huge difference. And it's super frustrating to watch people also taking a really sketchy risk on one side because you don't know if a bridge is down, and there was loads of sketchy wooden bridges on that railway line. But also your own piste is so sketchy, you can't ride fast. You just create a situation where all of a sudden everything is dangerous. Every option is dangerous. And then they bring the helicopter out, and there's like that balance in your head where if I do something really cool, I'm going to make it on TV. Like the cameraman thing. I'm like,
If I do something really bad, I'm going to make it on TV.
Exactly. And I was like, helicopter. I might do a wheelie. Oh, no, hole. And I had him like, oh, okay, we're not going to do that. We'll just go slow moment. So that's kind of, I think, it's a really double-edged sword with that risk level thing. Dakar's risky. You take a risk in going there trying to finish. That's part of the game. But I think whenever someone takes a piece of terrain that they know could be dangerous and they leave it in, or they don't do something about it, like tell you it's there, it could be dangerous, and then you have that situation of people crashing because of something that was a little bit out of their control, maybe.
But you remember that bit?
I do. I also remember lots of bits that weren't sketchy that were amazing, so that's not a good point. So here's a good question for someone. Do they clear slow riders out like L'Etape in the Tour de France?
Ish.
So you want to provide a little bit. So if you're in the Tour de France, you have this thing where if you're not within...
there's a cut-off time.
There's a cut-off time every single day behind the lead rider. So they have this thing where especially for the sprinters, where they're bigger, heavier riders, the mountain stages can be really problematic just to stay in the race. Like it's quite common to see like a Cavendish coming in and he's like all stressed out because he's got 2 minutes to get in or something. So they do, but I mean, you probably know the rules a little bit better on this than I do.
I can't really see a definitive pattern to it, really. They kind of make it up as they go along a little bit. But
there's a couple of other rules we found in the rule book like this as well.
It depends who the rider is. But yeah, sometimes, so last year and this year, they've had a couple of times where they've had an actual time cutoff, where if you don't make it, they're going to send you on the road to the bivouac, like around like the last section of dunes or something like that, and you'll go into the kind of Dakar experience category where you don't get a medal at the end. So and they're not kind of really that tight on time to make those, but they are there for sure. But yeah, as well, apart from that, it's just you've got to get to your start time the next morning. So that Alexandra, Bispo, and Sarah Juggler, they at the end of stage 5, about 100 k's from the finish, they stopped in the dunes to sleep basically until first light. They did the final 500 k's on the morning of stage 6. They finished stage 5 on the morning of stage 6, but they didn't make their start time, so they were sent to the bivouac on the road. They didn't do stage 6. So yeah, that's most days that's the rule. You just got to be in to make your start time the next day. And then they have some days where they know it's difficult terrain or where it's really inaccessible to kind of get you out if you get into trouble. And in those cases, they'll have they call it Puerta Cerrada, which is closed door in Spanish. And that's what they call it, and that's what they use. Yeah.
So I suppose there's another little bit alongside that where I think in the rule book it says you have to have a medical check to be allowed to leave for your start the next day as well. You're not allowed to. In my experience and the stories you hear, that medical check can be a little bit, are you about to fall asleep right now? Okay, off you go. Yeah. Don't fall asleep.
They have Dr. Nick from The Simpsons do that check.
He's also exploding a gas cylinder at the same time. I think that's actually one of the cool things about Dakar, though. We talk a lot about the safety element of things, but the doctors seem to strike a really good balance between convincing you and allowing you to push yourself to the limit, but when something's detrimental to your health, like a really bad concussion, they will pull you out, but they won't do it until it's either detrimental to your health or you're in a really bad way. And we saw it on the TV a little bit this year with that Sarah Juggler, when she hurt her wrist really bad, and basically the doctor says to her, you are going to continue, aren't you? You know, she's like having her wrist strapped up, and he's like, no, you're going on, aren't you? You're not going out because you've got a bad wrist. And she's like, yeah, I'm going to keep riding. I think it's really cool that they're like that. You know, they strike that balance between, this is a race for like people to prove to themselves that they're tough enough to get to the other side of a big desert, but not also to let riders do something that's going to really hurt them. A la like Conejo.
Hence, the Aussie guy, Andrew, I don't know his surname, Andrew, this year broke his scaphoid on day 3, eh?
Savage, man.
Wow.
And finished.
Savage.
Yeah, he finished.
Wow.
What? That's the most Australian thing I've ever heard of.
That's
more Australian than calling Ross Branch the Kalahari Ferrari. So there was another good question here for someone who's not super versed in the minutiae of Dakar rules. On several occasions, riders stopped to provide assistance to others, e.g. Ricky stopped when Toby crashed. How do they calculate the time when time stopped when no officials are around yet?
Because they can see it 100% on the GPS tracker on the bike.
Okay, so they know exactly the moment someone stops, and
it's one of the things that's absolutely fantastic. You know, we talk about all the safety, but that whole system that's on the bike, you know, that has come out of the history of ASO making massive safety improvements over the years. And for all we critique them, you know, they've done a lot for the sport, you know, many times when they've made those kind of improvements, and that's one of them. You know, it's for sure. It's from my point of view, like, that stuff's a massive game changer with the speed control and as well in villages and, you know, in areas where they need to control that they actually can measure it. It's fantastic.
I totally agree. I think it's fantastic, and I think the sat phone system, you used it, Si, and you've used it plenty of times. Like, the ability even just to let them know that you are okay, and that they are aware of your situation, and that they can manage you if you end up in that negative situation. They can come find you if you really need it. I think is incredible. Do you know, you do plenty of other races where they have GPS systems, but it's not like the ERTF one. Like, it's kind of what you pay for, right? Like, you pay for that level of assistance, but also as a result, Dakar lets you go into mental places, do stupid things in a relatively, like, the risk is suddenly much more controlled than a 1984 Dakar where you're just riding off into the Sahara on a bike with shit suspension, hoping that you come out the other end. Do you know? It changes the experience. I still don't want to get stuck in the desert, but if you really need to, they're probably able to help you, I think. And they know when you've crashed because of that GPS system. They have a built-in accelerometer and gyroscope and an upside downometer and you've hit your headometer, so they know what's going on in there, do you know? And I think that's a really, really good thing that they have all that. Like, when you have a big crash, they phone you straight away and go, hey dude, are you all right? And you go, oh yeah, I'm good, and you push the green button. And if you're kind of good but you're not that good and you need 10 minutes, you push the other button. So it's amazing, right? That's really, really, the whole system is fantastic. The Sentinel system as well, like, I mean, that was another point this year. The cars started quite close to the riders, and also the bike field was small, so you have that problem of cars getting deep into the bike field, and it's terrifying, man. It's bad enough with the Sentinel, but that system is a very good safety feature. The fact that cars can let you know that they're absolutely about to fill you in. I don't know if you saw it a couple of days ago. We shared a video of one of the factory cars annihilating a side-by-side. Just absolutely came around the outside of him and just he just disappeared into a cloud of dust and misery. So here's one for all three of us. what's your motivation behind entering a race as mental as Dakar, especially for you, Dad, because you did it 10 times? Talk us through the process.
I'm just a slow learner, and I have no motivation to do it left.
None left.
And I keep convincing other people to do it. I don't know why. Yeah, go on, Si. You tell us. You've got some hunger for it.
Yeah, it's for me. It's mostly just testing myself. Like I think I'm capable of finishing it, and it's just proving to myself and proving to other people, no one specifically, but just other people in general, that I'm capable of it. So, and for the adventure, you know, it's a massive stressful thing, but for the most part, it is massively enjoyable. And not just the race, but the journey to get to the race and everything you do in the lead up, and the people you meet and the experiences you get, and the podcast you get to go on, and all that kind of stuff.
And the places that you know, one of the things for me that's also a big draw with events like that is the places that you go. And it's a little bit different in Saudi versus South America when I did it, but in Saudi now, nobody's going to Saudi just to go for a pot around on their CRF 250L. It's not happening. Like, you're not going there.
No.
You get to ride your bike through these incredible environments and just pull up, if you're not Joan Barreda, in the middle of the desert and get fuel. And then you get back on your bike and you keep riding through these incredible environments. And sometimes you miss them because you're terrified of the piste. And sometimes you see them and they take your breath away, and you have these incredible rides in incredible trails, and that's really consistent with a lot of rally. Not all of it. Some of it is crap, because some bits of deserts are crap to ride through, but some of them are amazing, you know, and that was a big part of it for me as well, was alongside what you just said, was the opportunity to go and do something and see something that and grow and experience something that I probably wouldn't get to do otherwise. And, you know, I firmly believe, even if I was an avid, hardcore, exploratory adventure rider, the places that I went to in South America, the trails I rode, the depths into the desert that I went to, I just wouldn't do if I turned up on a KLA 650. Do you know, I just wouldn't go there. I'd ride some of the big dirt roads, and occasionally I'd go, I wonder what's up that one. But there's no way I'd go into those places, because you wouldn't know where it was going. You know, you don't spend all year looking for them. So that's kind of a big part of it, is that there's, if you're capable of doing it and you want to push yourself to see that, the adventure and the exploration that it affords you is monumental. And that's kind of what Dakar started from. And I think, unless you're trying to win the race, that is definitely still there. Like, everybody comes back with these stories of ridiculous things you saw other people do and that you did, and I don't know, that kind of, there's a motivation in an enjoyment in that. The same reason that people do something like the Mongol Rally, where they buy a crap car and they drive to Mongolia. You do it because you can.
Oh, damn it, you're making it sound so good. Maybe I will go there.
Well, you just pick a new one, you know. Maybe you just pick a different way of doing it.
I think my background picture is like, that's like the perfect example. Like, I'm just a kid from South Wales who, you know, grew up riding in forests and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, I've ridden a motorcycle through the empty quarter of Saudi Arabia. I'd never get to do that if it wasn't for motorcycle racing. You wouldn't go into that kind of stuff on a trail ride, you know.
So here's another quick question on the minutiae of rules. I've spent way too much time reading the rule book. Are the elite riders prohibited from continuing in the Dakar experience? One would think that they could offer assistance to their other team members.
So
that's true, yes.
And that's why they're not allowed to continue for that. Well, one, for that reason, and two, for, you know, they'd be very disruptive going that fast, starting from the back of the race and coming through, you know, if they were all continuing on on the elite, on that Dakar experience after they'd gone out, because they'd then be starting last the next day and causing carnage.
Yeah.
So here's another question as well. We mentioned it a few minutes ago about the nuances of a French written rule book. I think they're very different to a British or an American or an Australian written rule book, where things are maybe a bit more set in stone. But there's a beautiful rule that we discovered a couple of days ago. 2 years ago, they ran the last stage in reverse order. And we looked this up. And I want to try and understand what you think their thought process with this is. But the rule says we will decide before the start of the last stage what the order for the last stage will be. On what planet are they deciding things that important about the race? And it could have massively changed the outcome this year. So what planet are they? What's going on there?
Beautiful, isn't it? Beautiful. Love it.
Who knows?
I mean, is this a situation of if a French ride, like if de Sautre's third and he's leading out the last stage, is this a situation where, like, if you're French, we're going to help you out? Like, they got, I'm only playing here, but for a long time, if you were French, you were definitely going to be looked after in the Dakar.
No question.
For a long
really
time.
No
I think
question.
it's changed now.
I mean,
without a doubt.
they didn't even used to do the briefings or anything in anything other than French.
Yeah, if you didn't speak fluent French or know someone that did, life was probably difficult. Even the English road book now is still in French. It's called English, but all of the abbreviations are French words. You have to either learn what they mean or learn the French word, which is no problem. It's a French race. That's their prerogative. But just that rule is like, that's out there. We can change the rules depending on what we feel like on the eve of the last stage. And can you imagine this year if they had flipped it, they put Sam as the last rider out, as they did 2 years ago with Quintanilla and Price? It was different then because those two weren't starting first and second, and there was a minute between them, so they just made it an all-out race. But this year, 3 riders, a clear, like, tactical process through the race the last few days. Can you imagine? Like, how is that even still in there?
Imagine... Yeah, Ricky Bravik would definitely have thrown the toys at the pram then, wouldn't he?
Yeah, they'd have sent the Statue of Liberty back.
Yeah.
So,
brutal.
Last question. I think we're 2 hours and 10 minutes into this, so we're probably starting to get to the limit. Apparently in the Tour de France, it helps to be French as well. It's true. Definitely true. If you could pick the destination for next year, where would you pick? And nowhere is off limits. Any place on earth.
I think a Dakar in Australia would be awesome. I think, for me. But obviously there's a whole host of...
Need to work on your gate opening skills then, Si.
Yeah, exactly.
And your kangaroo and emu dodging.
Yeah.
What about you?
I'm back on the kind of Asia game, really, the sort of China, Mongolia.
Yeah.
I want to go and play more there.
I totally agree. My tiny experience of China is that would be an incredible place to hold I mean, they do hold Silkway there, but a Dakar in that rally, you could really you could mess some people up with some big sand dunes for sure.
Yeah.
And amazing, like we talked about it before, but the terrain and the scenery is incredible, right? And it's one of those things that if you're not in a race, it's not so easy to go there. You can't really just... Yeah. We can, but it's difficult to just pop over to China and have a little bimble round. Not such a accessible place. So, one last question, and then we're going to call it. Sci P, did they serve brie in the bivouac when you started going?
Oh yeah, that's been the one thing that's been pretty solid, really. To be fair.
What, consistency of French cheeses?
Yeah, consistency of French cheeses. Yeah, there has always been little bottles, especially back in the Africa day when the whole bivouac was French. You know, there was always brie, red wine, little mini bottles of red wine on the bivouac every night. Fantastic. That's the one thing they've always done well.
And there's that quite disgusting photo.
There's the famous Tony McCauley story from years ago as well with his Emmental in the ration pack. He put a hole in his crankcase, and the little ration pack had a little packet of Emmental in it, and he used it to bung up the hole in his engine and rode the last 100 k's of the stage with cheese holding the oil in. Good job.
There's no way that actually made a difference. There's no way. No.
True story.
He might have put cheese in there, but there's no way it made a difference. That's like desperation that's like trying to cable tie your tire up and hoping that cable ties hold. Right, very good. That is the end of the podcast. If you like podcasts and you don't mind the sound of my voice in my lovely microphone, we do a podcast on Patreon, which is starting very shortly, where we talk about subjects in depth. Those subjects can be very interesting, from how to get to the end of Dakar Rally to how to turn my favorite episode from season 1 was how to turn your GS into a raft and make an outboard motor of it. Fantastic episode. You can come and check those out on patreon.com/break magazine. If you want to know more about Cy Hewitt and his impending Dakar 2022 adventure, you can find him on Facebook at Simon Hewitt Dakar Rally 2022. I believe that is
Something
correct.
like that.
And if
Something
you want to
like
know
that,
more about Cy Pavey, you can either find him and his excellent teaching company, who we both teach at as well, called Off-Road Skills at offroadskills.com, or you can find him on social media, but he doesn't really post anything. So it'll be just looking at... That's not unfair, is it? There was a cool photo you posted the other day of your first Dakar. Yeah,
that was awesome.
It was a great photo. I've never considered you a particularly short person, but in that you look like a tiny human. surrounded by giants.
They built Dakar races big in those days.
Yeah, they did indeed. This is a strange question to end on. Before you guys, as a man with 2-stroke oil for blood, does the Dakar change your life? Yeah, probably. I think it probably teaches. I don't know. What do you think? Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, it does. Yeah.
100% it did for me.
It'll definitely change your life if you do it on a 2-stroke, because you'll have white finger for the rest of your life.
I'd be a little bit jealous if someone managed to do that in modern times.
What, on a 2-stroke, like a big one?
There was a few in the early years, wasn't there, for sure?
Oh, there was the bloke a few years ago that did it on a 125 as well.
Yeah.
What was it, like 12 pistons in 14 days or something? So anyway, that's that. That's all the wisdom we've got. And as I said at the start, if you want a lovely hoodie for your cold winter times, come and check out Break Magazine's shop. On that note, it's been a pleasure, everyone. Have a good evening.